Sit down! You are cowards! I will not sit down! I won't comply! You guys are cowards!
And who are you to tell me what I can and cannot do?
Stop throwing it down my throat and everybody else. I am very pissed.
I cannot believe you can sit up here with a smug smile on both of your faces.
No more now.
The sounds you're hearing, they're the voices of angry parents at school board meetings, letting their elected officials know how they feel about mask mandates, about how students learn about history, racism, sexism, gender identity, and what books they should be allowed to read.
You're teaching children to hate others because of their skin color, and you're forcing them to lie about other kids' gender.
They are the sounds of America's culture wars.
These are our kids, not yours!
Trying to recall this
My name is Ken Feudernick, and for the past 3 years, I've hosted a podcast called Teacher Stories about the profound and lasting impact teachers often have on their students. But as a parent, as a career-long educator, and as a citizen who's worried about the future of our democracy, the battles playing out about our schools are absolutely heartbreaking. More and more frightened and frustrated teachers are leaving the profession, a profession that is already beset by critical shortages that prevent kids across the country from getting a quality education. School administrators and dedicated board members are also quitting in large numbers, which means the important work of running schools is not getting done as the culture wars in schools rage on. So what's really going on here? Why are some parents and even some teachers so angry? Why suddenly are so many states passing laws restricting what teachers can say and do in the classroom, and restricting what students can read and learn? Is all of the vitriol towards teachers and our public schools just manufactured by the media and by political extremists? Maybe. But regardless of the reasons, the disdain and mistrust of public education is clearly on the rise. What I've really wanted to know was what would happen if we turned down the volume, if we lowered the temperature just a bit and got parents, educators, students, policymakers, people with strong opinions and different perspectives to speak from the heart and to really listen to one another. Maybe, just maybe, they discover that they don't understand one another, that they might actually have something in common. This is what motivated me to start this new podcast, Courageous Conversations About Our Schools. So I thought I'd start the podcast by inviting people with wildly different viewpoints and political positions to talk about a concept that sits at the center of the culture wars: indoctrination. The idea that many teachers today are brainwashing their students and not really teaching them. Listen to what Kaylee Fontanilla wrote in an article published in the Orange County Register. She recently quit after teaching for 5 years in Salinas, California. It became clear to me, she says, that school officials were obsessed with left-wing indoctrination. She goes on to say that the ethnic studies course in her district is, quote, nothing short of far-left brainwashing of our young people from start to finish. And here is a parent speaking at a school board meeting in Carmel, New York.
I'm here tonight not only as a community member, but as a parent in this district. I think the Board of Education and those sitting on the panels are thieves. I think they're liars and have committed treason against our children. My message to this district and the members of the Board of Ed: stop indoctrinating our children. Stop teaching our children to hate the police. Stop teaching our children that if they don't agree with the LGBT community, that they're homophobic.
And here's a teacher speaking at a school board meeting in Fairfax, Virginia.
Parents, the longer that you wait and you don't hold your child's schools accountable gives these guys more time to dictate what's best for your child's physical, mental, and emotional health. Don't be afraid to speak out for your kids because they are voiceless and they rely on you. You should be afraid of them rooting for socialism by the time they get to middle school. Teachers, it may seem that our careers have come to a dead end, but I'm here to remind you we don't work for the school board. We work to mold the next generation of well-rounded American patriots. So don't give up, because it is up to us. Students, you are on the front lines of these indoctrination camps. Challenge the staff when you're presented with a ludicrous statement, and do not allow anybody to tell you that you cannot accomplish anything because of your skin color, or to hate yourself because of your skin color.
And then I found a group called Parents Defending Education, which describes itself as, quote, a national grassroots organization working to reclaim our schools from activists imposing harmful agendas. Through network and coalition building, investigative reporting, litigation, and engagement on local, state, and national policies, we are fighting indoctrination in the classroom and promoting the restoration of a healthy, non-political education for our kids. End quote. So I thought, wouldn't it be great if I could get a leader at Parents Defending Education to be part of our conversation on indoctrination? So I reached out to Erica Sanzi, the organization's director of outreach, to see if she'd be willing to join me and a few others with different perspectives in a taped conversation about indoctrination. Honestly, I didn't know what she'd say. Maybe she'd tell me to get lost. What are you, some liberal hack, another cultural warrior looking for soundbite to trash what we're doing? Well, she took my call, and I explained what I had in mind, hosting a conversation, not a debate, about indoctrination where the purpose would be to listen and to better understand one another. Turns out my phone call with Erica was delightful. She wasn't defensive and said she'd love to participate. We even spent some time discussing one of the key questions I wanted to pose to the group. What does it mean to indoctrinate?
And indoctrination in the classroom is one of many topics that we sort of deal with and talk about every day.
We reached out to a few others and got commitments from 4 more individuals. Josie Reich.
I'm a senior at School Without Walls High School in downtown DC, which is right near the White House. And I am interested in this issue. I have been since for my entire high school career.
Krista Williams, an African-American high school teacher from Cleveland, Ohio.
I actually teach at the school that I attended as a child. I work also for Living Room Conversations. I'm their racial equity partner. And at my school, I do a lot of the DEI and belonging work for my fellow teachers as well.
Joe Murray, a lawyer and middle school history teacher from Tennessee.
Originally from New Jersey, though, still have those Garden State roots. Have to plug it, but I just released a book, Take Back Education, which tries to help people figure out how to get education back from the brink where I think it is right now, public education, that is.
He was also a former speechwriter for Pat Buchanan, the conservative Republican who ran for president back in 1992. And finally, we found Kristen Allen, a lawyer, a parent, and a school board member for the Cherry Creek School District in Colorado, the second largest district in the state.
Just elected back in November. I have 2 children in our public schools. They are in 1st grade and 5th grade. And I have been volunteering in our schools, both on the school level and the district level, since my oldest started kindergarten.
She was familiar with the charges of teachers indoctrinating students and welcomed the idea of talking about it with others. So we were all set to go. The question was, would people really listen to each other, or would it devolve into an episode of Jerry Springer? A culture war skirmish might attract lots of listeners, but it really wasn't what I had in mind. Oh, what I haven't told you yet is that each person agreed to follow a few conversation agreements. These agreements are similar to ones used by an organization called Living Room Conversations, which has been hosting respectful meetings on highly controversial topics with people who have radically different points of view, and they've been doing that for a number of years now. Still, would someone unexpectedly throw out some kind of a zinger and set everyone else off? I think it's always so important to begin a conversation when you're talking about a controversial topic by defining our terms. And so we're going to start by asking all of you to speak within the 2-minute time frame about what indoctrination means in your mind and how it differs from education. Erica, why don't we start with you?
When I think of the word indoctrination, and I first want to acknowledge, I know that this word can be like, it's kind of a flashpoint word for some people. They have a negative reaction to it, which is maybe worth exploring at some point. I don't have that reaction to it. To me, it's the best word for what we're talking about. And if there's another one out there that means the same thing, I'd be happy to use that one. But to me, it's the process. And in the process of teaching students, in this case, to accept a set of beliefs uncritically. So so to me, it's when something is being taught almost as if it's gospel, as opposed to something that we teach as one perspective.
Thank you, Erica. Crystal, how about you?
I'm going to echo some of what Erica said, because that's literally what I wrote in my notes. The idea that we are teaching students and providing theories for them, but not allowing them to be critical of them. Just, this is the way it is. And this is the perspective that I'm giving you, and don't ask questions because this is how we do things in the United States.
Joe, how about you?
I think we're kind of hitting the nail on the head. How I view indoctrination is teaching conclusions that if you question, you're either demonized or maligned, or you are shown the door. I would add one thing to it. It also has the authority of the state behind it. So it's not just, Joe Blow on the street corner saying this is how it is. You have the complete authority of the state in which you teach, endorsing a message which sends chilling effects to anyone that dares to question. I see this all the time. I had a conversation not too long ago with someone in another district saying, well, we were talking about Winston Churchill, and the student said, oh, he's racist. I said, okay. So why is he racist? Oh, yeah, we were taught he said bad things, he's racist. Now, look, you can come to that conclusion if you want, but what indoctrination does, it just has you reach what I call conclusory allegations, and you never provide meat to the bones. And to me, that's what indoctrination is.
Josie, what does indoctrination mean to you, and how does it differ from education?
Well, I think indoctrination and education are pretty much opposites. I think indoctrination is teaching what that one thing is right and not to be questioned. And then education is teaching a concept and then teaching critical thinking and making sure that the concept is thought about through multiple different lenses and perspectives.
And Kristen, love to hear your thoughts on this question of what indoctrination is in your mind.
So I echo what everybody else has said. Sounds like we're all thinking the same way about the definition. I kind of like to sum it up with indoctrination is basically answering the question of why, because I said so, without giving the facts, without teaching the facts, without teaching those critical thinking skills. And education is answering the question of why with providing the facts and information to get to that answer.
So I'm just going to offer this perspective that I agree with, I think, what everyone said, that it is indoctrination to me is an attempt to try to get other people or students, if it's in school, to believe something, to hold a perspective simply because we said it's true, and without giving them the opportunity to decide for themselves or to study whether they in fact think it's true themselves. Education, on the other hand, I think is creating the conditions for our students to adopt their own perspectives, provided that their perspectives or beliefs, points of view are based on reasons and evidence, and when it's appropriate, on sound moral thinking. Indoctrination is kind of a pejorative term, it's a negative term, so we react and say, well, that's not a good idea and shouldn't be doing it. But the question now that I'd like you to respond to is indoctrination ever acceptable? Does it ever happen in schools when we say that's not necessarily a bad thing? And I think, Josie, we'll start with you on that one.
I mean, my short answer is no, with the definition of indoctrination that we all sort of hinted at. I think it's always important to think critically about what you're being introduced to. A few years ago, when I was a freshman at my school, there was a senior who left the school and sued, claiming to have been bullied for her political affiliation, which I live, in the most liberal part of the country, and she was on the very opposite end of the political spectrum, and she was probably one of the only ones in my school. But the end result of the whole situation was that the school didn't do much about it, and the student body laughed her off, and it became sort of a joke, and there wasn't any addressing by the school of the culture within the student body, and as moved along by the administration, that allowed for a student to not feel safe or respected or able to express her opinions because she held a minority viewpoint. So I know firsthand the effect of disregarding an opinion that is different from what most people around you believe. And so I think it's very important to make sure that learning environments don't allow for that at all.
Thank you, Josie. Joe, how about you? Is indoctrination ever acceptable?
I think as we defined it here today, no, but I think we also have to understand that to work in a society, we have to come to an agreement that there are absolute truths, and we agree as to what absolute truth we are going to adhere to. John Locke would call that the social contract. John Jay wrote about that in Federalist 2, saying what it was able to bind these 13 disparate colonies together was they shared the same language, the same religion, the same culture, the same heroes, the same villains. And you need to have that sense of unity as a country in order to move forward. Because what happens is if we cannot agree on who we are, then we risk the very real danger of balkanizing and becoming basically tribal camps that will set up shop in certain parts of the country and will be teaching and doing different things, not critically thinking, but just doing it instinctively as being sort of a protection mechanism. And I think one of the biggest things that has really come into education is not necessarily indoctrination, which is a big thing, but this sense of moral relativism, which we can't say there's a right or wrong without the fear of hurting someone's feelings. There is a right or wrong. And I think as a society, we have to decide what that is. And if we can't decide what that is, are we a society? So no, we do not have indoctrination in the classroom, but yes, we do have to have certain principles that we all adhere to that they believe are absolute and true and are worthy of our defense.
Erica, let's come to you.
I echo what everyone has said so far on this. I think it is really important to steer clear of it as much as you can. That doesn't mean that, that I think what happens is then people get so extra nervous about it that then they think they can't even, they can't even talk about the State of the Union, or they can't even talk about, as the political tribes, let's just call them, have sort of decided not just, I don't agree with your philosophy or I don't agree with your opinion on this, but they've begun to demonize people and dehumanize one another so that the other becomes a caricature, right? And you see this especially in places where everybody who lives near there, 95% are Democrats or 95% are Republicans. I am blessed to live in a town, believe it or not, it exists, that if you split us up, we're like a red-blue pie, half and half. So I think that you get away from some of this because your neighbors and the people you carpool with and the people that you see around, like, you're not caricatures, you're just regular people. But so, yeah, I think you steer clear from this, but you also, I think, don't overcorrect to the point where you don't feel like you can have, conversations in the hallways or with your students about topics that touch on politics, history, the culture wars, just that it's not, I'm on the right side of history, you're evil. That's where I feel like we're really wrong and we need to right the ship.
Thanks, Eric. And I think that's what we're trying to do here. And I think it's working. I think we're hearing and people are listening to one another and having a courageous conversation about an interesting, complicated topic and doing it in a way that's respectful. Kristen, I'm going to come to you next.
I think that it's never acceptable for teachers to indoctrinate students. I've heard a lot about it in this campaign and the beginning of my tenure on the school board. I think indoctrination is fundamentally opposed to education and teaching. And I am concerned that the term is being used and thrown around as a scare tactic. I think we really need to, if we're concerned about what our teachers are teaching, I think they deserve much more than a soundbite regarding this scary term that frightens so many people.
Crystal, let's come to you.
So based on our definition, I don't think it's ever acceptable. However, I do think there are examples where schools are doing this. And the example I'll give is saying the Pledge of Allegiance. We don't do it in my district at the high school level, but at the district that I work in and in several of the districts around me, we say the Pledge of Allegiance. My 10-year-old niece says it. I said it when I was a child. And this idea that America is the best, you pledge allegiance, you don't really question it. I think a lot of what's happening is, depending on what you look like and where you're from, America could be the best country ever. And if you look a different way, it might not be the best country ever. And I think it can be hard to reconcile with that when you've always been told this is the best country, everyone has a fair shot, everyone is treated equally. And then you learn that that's not true, either through your own experiences or you hear about it from others. But if it hasn't happened to you personally, or maybe to someone you know, it can be hard to believe that, because we are taught from a very young age that this is a country where liberty and justice for all, no matter what. And so I use that example of the Pledge of Allegiance because that's the last line. And that's something that stuck with me growing up. Like I mean, in school, like you worked hard, you did what you were supposed to do, and you were going to have a fair shot because you worked hard, you did what you needed to do, and that was that. And I saw many people around me who are not treated as a full and complete American because of what they look like or other parts of their identity. And so while I don't think it's acceptable to indoctrinate students based on the definition that we all provided, I think it definitely still happens in schools.
Thank you for that. I'm going to go last year and say something that may be a little different from what all of you said, because I think we do indoctrinate sometimes, and I think it's actually acceptable. I want to give an example. And of course, it depends on what we mean by it. But I'm thinking about young children who come into school, kindergartners, first graders, and we have rules and we have values about how you're supposed to treat each other. You're supposed to be kind. It's not okay to take other people's stuff. It's not okay to cheat. And they don't really have a choice in the matter. And so that is sort of a form of indoctrination. I think, Joe, it goes back to what you were saying, is there certain, I don't know if I'd call them absolutes, but maybe they're sort of commonly agreed upon values. But here's what I would say, I think what we do have a choice about beyond inculcating certain values about how you treat other people, that when kids violate those expectations and take something from someone else or bully another kid, if we just punish, and suspend kids or simply punish, it typically doesn't cause the behavior to stop. They just learn to try to avoid getting caught the next time. On the other hand, if, say, when kids are bullying or teasing others, rather than punish, if we have kids engage in what are called restorative practices and listen to the people, hear from the people that have been teased or bullied, they often get a sense of the pain that they've caused, and it's more likely to lead to what we want, which is that they stop bullying, not because they're fearful that they would get punished, but because they realize that they've had an impact on someone that they didn't realize. And that, I think, is going from indoctrination. It's important to behave this way, to education, where we want them to understand the reasons why we're teaching something. With that, I'm going to move to our third question about indoctrination. And the question is this: is it indoctrination when teachers teach their students to be kind, to be patriotic, or to embrace and promote, say, a concept like social justice? Let me start with you, Joe, and I'll work my way down from Joe, then to Erica, and then Crystal, and so forth.
That's a great question. What I have seen with indoctrination, when you look at social justice, I've often said, get 20 teachers in a room and ask them to define social justice, and you get 20 different definitions. It's one of those terms that's used not because it means something, because of the avenues it creates into getting something in. In researching my book, I saw so many examples of how kids were saying, well, you're white, so you're automatically coming at this with a racist tendency. Now, I was in civil rights law for 15 years, and I did my best to fight for race claims, gender claims, religion claims. And the basis of that fight was that we don't see color, we see character. And what we are seeing now is that being rewound to where you have to see color, and you use color now to differentiate among people. You indict others and you victimize others. And that, to me, is very dangerous, because it goes against that key aspect of individualism. And I think you're right that we have not been a perfect country. No country has. I think every civilization known to man has engaged in the practice of slavery. But I ask, what country has done the most to stop and correct it? Not perfect, far from it. The only folks that are perfect are up with the good Lord. And that's about it. But this country has done so much to try to right those wrongs, sometimes slower rather than others. And I think what we're seeing is a reverse indoctrination, where we are taking down the pillars of the West. If you look at what happened in 2020, right? Everybody that was under siege was one of the fathers of Western civilization. Was there a disproportionate representation? Yes. And it was partly due to the times. But does that minimize their accomplishments? Absolutely not. And I think these terms that we throw around now, racist and sexist, without knowing the full context, that is the ugliness of indoctrination.
Erica, your thoughts about whether it's possible to teach students to be patriotic or to embrace and promote social justice without indoctrination, without it being indoctrination?
I immediately think of former President Obama. You guys probably remember, he used to say a lot, my story is only possible in the United States of America. And so he was never implying that it was perfect or that it, wasn't covered in all sorts of warts. But he was saying definitively that there wasn't any other place that would offer the same opportunities for him, as the United States, right? So I wouldn't, so let's just say that a lesson, they jump off of that quote from a former president. That to me isn't indoctrinating in patriotism. That's having, an honest conversation about what are we? And so just like some sort of patriotic ideal, sort of, jingoistic version of history would never be acceptable. It's also not acceptable to teach students, and I have to say, I fear this is beginning to happen, that we're an irredeemably racist, white supremacist nation. I mean, the truth lies right in the middle, and we're always striving to be better.
Crystal, let's hear from you.
Joe mentioned social truths and things like that. And I feel like being kind is something that we can ask our students to do and treat our students to do, not treat our students, but ask our students to do. And I feel like that's something that everyone can agree on. I know I shouldn't speak in generalizations, but I think asking students to be kind is something that is okay. Being patriotic, so I think when I think about patriotism, I think oftentimes I'll speak from my experience. I grew up in the era of color blindness. We don't see color, things like that. I graduated high school in 2003. And I really believed that like people would just see me for my character and for my accomplishments. And I thought racism was over. Like I just read that was something that happened like in the South and that it was over. And the first time I was called the N-word, it was in Cleveland, Ohio, in the North. And so I think when we talk about patriotism, how do we make space for students who have experienced these things, be it because of their gender or because of their race, and still hear that they want to like love their country, but they're still, how do we help them work through experiences that they have had that have not been positive in this country? How do we do that? Allow them to make space for talking about things that they would like to improve, and talk about things that maybe are not positive that have happened as it relates to patriotic, without ostracizing them and saying like, well, you must not love your country. Like you're just focusing on race and you're just focusing on all of the bad things.
Kristen.
I generally think it's indoctrination when we're teaching kindness, patriotism, or promotion of social justice without providing the facts. And again, I think that these are all ideas that can be good and can be bad. I don't want my child to be kind to her bully. I don't want to tell somebody who has experienced injustice that they must be patriotic. And I don't want I don't want any teacher to promote social justice without explaining, without providing the education of what all of these things are.
Josie, how about you?
I think similar to what Joe was mentioning earlier with absolute truths, I don't know that personally that there are absolute truths, but I do think it's important for society to operate off some mutual agreements. And I think schools have a responsibility to educate students for citizenship within that society. And so it is a tough line to walk sometimes.
Thank you, Josie. And I don't think I have too much to add. I guess what I would say about those concepts, I think there's a common theme in what we're talking about, is that some of these concepts, the definitions are not agreed upon and they're unclear. And what I would want from teachers talking about patriotism is to ask their students, what does it mean to love your country? What does it mean to be patriotic? Is it possible to love your country when your country has not lived up to the ideals that it set out to accomplish? What does it mean? What does social justice really mean? Is it embedded in our Constitution? Is it one of our founding principles? And but I think if you walked into a classroom where teachers were asking those questions, I think we'd all agree that education was going on and not indoctrination, because they're having kids define it and they're conceding the point that we may all have different definitions of what it means. So let's explore that together and get different people's perspectives before we decide we're for or against it. But I sort of think what I'm hearing from everyone is that that we're kind of talking about the same thing. We're talking about teaching these in a way that isn't indoctrinating and allowing kids to form their own opinions based on reasons and evidence. So I think with that, we're going to move to our final couple of questions and just now reflect a bit on what we've just been doing. Josie, let me come to you and ask you, what do you take away from the conversation we just had?
Well, I think that if you put this group of people in a classroom to discuss like a specific political or historical thing or idea, there would be a pretty wide range of viewpoints about it. And yet we all had very similar definitions for indoctrination, and all agreed that it's not an okay thing to have as part of education. I would love to hear the more in-depth beliefs of what other people hinted at and what they've worked on.
Thank you, Josie. Kristen, how about you? What do you take away from this? And I'm going to combine the second question with it, is has your thinking about any of this changed in any way as a result of our conversation today?
And just listening to everybody's answers, I once again am reminded that we are all passionate about education and teaching and providing a great education for our kids. And we may have different views about, just different political views and how we get there. But if the end goal is we all share in common and is educating our children, we're in better shape than the media is presenting us to be. And has my thinking changed in every way? I think my thinking changes a little bit every time I hear different perspectives, because the more I learn, the better I am. So thank you all for sharing your perspectives.
Crystal, how about you? What's your takeaway from today? And has your thinking changed at all about this topic of indoctrination?
Piggybacking off what people have said, this idea that we were all passionate about education and that we agree that we all defined indoctrination as having this negative connotation, and we want our kids to be educated and critical thinkers. And knowing that we agree on that, how do we talk about and work through the things we don't agree on for the benefit of our kids, right? Because they will eventually be running the world, and we want to make sure that they have what they need. I'm taking away this idea of absolute truth that Joe mentioned earlier. I really do want to think more about that and what these absolute truths in the United States are. And if they look different for different groups, how can we still come together as Americans and not be so polarized? So that's sort of my takeaway, what I'm thinking about right now.
Erica, how about you?
Well, the first thing I have to say is that Josie is totally bringing back memories of when I taught high school. And I have all boys, so I'm the mother of 3 sons. And so it was always my students that gave me my girl fixes. And so I've been sitting here going, oh my gosh, I wish she lived closer. Now I want to hang out with her. So anyway, I just love being with you, Josie. And it's been a while since I've been around a high school senior. I have really enjoyed this. I'm not surprised actually that it went so well, because I just sort of thought that it would. And I find too that when people just talk to one another, it's never really quite like the explosive fireworks, that we see the media sort of presenting. I don't mean to imply that there aren't really strong emotions. I don't mean to imply that there aren't lots of fireworks at school board meetings, but I'm actually quite sure that even some of the most intense exchanges at those meetings would go much better in a different setting if the 2 people or the 3 people, laid out these agreements ahead of time and tried to have a conversation. Something that I thought was really interesting was Crystal, when she immediately thought of the Pledge of Allegiance. And the reason I think that's interesting is because there is concern about students being asked, either required or pressured to take pledges in school. Not the Pledge of Allegiance, by the way, pledges for other things, sort of like social justice cause pledges. But what's interesting is that the same people that are really uncomfortable with that pressure and those pledges are often people who really, really value and want their children saying the Pledge of Allegiance. And so that just, I think, is something to think about, right? Is it's you may hate this pledge, but you love this pledge. So wouldn't it be reasonable that someone else might like this one and not like this one? And so it just gave me something to think about. And I now have written it down as just something to think about and, talk about with some people. So thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Joe, how about you? What's your takeaway from today?
I had something in my head, and then after Crystal and Erica with the pledge and all that, I'm going to have to do an audible here and talk about that, because I think that is what I take away. Through teaching history and seeing how the kids respond to it, we take for granted, and I know myself included, I take for granted a number of things. And, I see the Pledge of Allegiance as that one agreement that we have, that this is the rules of the game. And when I see patriotism, I often hope that, and I see it in the media all the time, that patriotism is confused with nationalism, which are two different things. To me, Martin Luther King was one of the biggest patriots around. Patriotism is challenging society when it deviates from that social contract, when it deviates from what we say in the pledge. That is our patriotic duty, to stand up and say, no, that's not our agreement. Our agreement is that we are treated equal, and I'm going to stand up and fight for it. And I know it might seem that I'm coming from the white male perspective, but one of the things that I haven't shared until right now is that I've been happily married to my husband for 12 years. And I understand, there are places I've been where we've walked down the street and we've had to think twice whether or not you can do something as holding hands. And where I see me in society, and where I see anyone that has somewhat times felt marginalized in society, is, I go back to that pledge and say, look, this is what we're fighting for. We're in this society because we know it sometimes might take longer, much longer than needed. But I know that these ideals that are in our Constitution and our Bill of Rights and that are emboldened in that pledge, that's what unites us. And what scares me is that we're now arguing not whether or not how we get there, but whether or not we tear the whole darn thing up. But what this group has really done for me is shown that there is hope. We can have rational conversations, and I think we should appoint ourselves all as the ambassadors to education, and we can fix this thing in another 2 hours?
Well, now that I've had a chance to reflect a bit on what happened during our first courageous conversation, I have to say it was pretty gratifying. It didn't go off the rail. People listened to one another, and some common ground emerged. The conversation actually confirmed a few things I've been reading about in an excellent book called High Conflict by Amanda Ripley. It demonstrated, for instance, the power of contact theory, the common sense notion supported by hundreds of studies that people with dramatically different viewpoints often become less prejudiced towards one another. They become more respectful and more willing to listen if they've spent some time together. You didn't hear this part of the conversation, but before diving into our discussion of indoctrination, I asked everyone to describe a favorite teacher they had or a positive experience they'd had in school. I also asked them to identify something they thought schools should accomplish for students. That opportunity for personal contact, brief as it was, brought some humanity to the conversation. Well, so the first conversation felt like a success, but I was also left with some lingering questions. What we didn't consider, a question that lies at the heart of a conversation about indoctrination, is how prevalent it really is. Are schools really indoctrination camps, as the teacher from Virginia claimed at the top of the episode? And when indoctrination does occur, is it done equally by left-leaning teachers and by right-leaning teachers? Here's another question I've been pondering. The conversation agreements we followed: be respectful, don't interrupt, don't speak longer than 2 minutes, helped keep the conversation civil. But what would have happened if we had allowed people to ask questions of one another? I actually think that might have worked with this group. It might have led to what Amanda Ripley calls healthy conflict, the type that leads somewhere useful and does not collapse into dehumanizing rhetoric. In the next set of courageous conversations we're working on, I'm going to push for a little more interaction and hope we can still preserve the humanity that allows us to listen to one another. Speaking of current events, we have several in the works. Our next one is on a topic at the epicenter of the culture wars, critical race theory, or, as we're framing the question, how should students learn about race and racism? After that, we will be discussing Florida's so-called Don't Say Gay bill that was recently signed by their governor, and the larger question about the role schools should play with respect to gender and sexual identity. If you want to see all of the conversations we have planned, if you want to view or listen to the entire conversation we just had about indoctrination, you can find it all at schoolconversations.org. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Bye-bye.